And a lot of times I think as long as your team understands that, one, you are advocating for them, but two, you have to be a steward of the business and they are responsible as well. And they're themselves going out and speaking with all the folks in the company so they know what's going on. So you're generally having reasonable conversations as long as they understand the why and the logic behind it and can debate with you on it. Listen, sometimes you're going to miss things. Hear people when they tell you, no way, you're driving me crazy. I can't do this again. I need some help on the team. And then you have those conversations. But hopefully you're having conversations well before it gets to that point.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to the Run the Numbers podcast, where finance isn't just about forecasting, it's about frameworks and friction a lot of the time, and occasionally expensing a bracelet as a client gift. That's in the no-fly zone, folks. Today's guest is my friend Michaela Lehr, former CFO of ActionIQ, and a seasoned FP&A leader who approaches finance like a utility function. And no, that's not just consultant speak. She's got the microeconomics to back it up. Michaela's built a reputation for turning complex businesses into models of operational clarity and for bringing an unusually high degree of empathy into a role not always known for soft skills. In this episode, we get into what it means to think of a company like a utility function with levers like growth, retention, margin, and cash runway, and how to pull them for maximum value without blowing something up. Why not all growth is created equal. I say that all the time. And how to distinguish durable, high-quality revenue from a sugar high of net new sales. Margin as a cultural language, how to make engineers care about AWS bills. That's always a hard one. And why gross margin adjusted CAC payback is her go-to efficiency lens. It melts my heart. The real reason investors are obsessed with net dollar retention and why upsell is the best growth engine you are probably under leveraging. How to spot good actors on the exec team and what happens when trust breaks down and common sense goes out the window. And finally, budgeting in the real world, why every budget is wrong, how to move past the just give me my budget mindset, and how to protect your own team's resources without playing the martyr CFO. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. Morgan Stanley recently said NetSuite is under the threat of disruption. That's right, NetSuite, the you never get fired for buying it software. So what's the threat? The answer, Rillet. Rillet is the AI native ERP modern finance teams are switching to because it's faster, simpler, and 100% built for how teams operate today. It doesn't take 12 months to implement, it doesn't feel like filing taxes to use, and your accounting team will actually love it. PostScript closes the books in only 3 days. Windsurf, bet you heard of them. They run finance with just 2 people. And Rillet is backed by Sequoia Capital. Yes, that's Sequoia. Unicorns like PostScript and Windsurf and hundreds of other companies have made the switch, and they're closing books in record time. If I were running a finance team today, I wouldn't default to legacy. I'd look at what's coming next, and Rillet is here. You don't want to be that guy at cocktail parties complaining about how bad his ERP is. Wait, am I the only guy who talks about ERPs around a keg? See how fast your team can move. Book a demo at rillet.com/metrics. That's RILLET.com/metrics. RILLET.com/metrics. As a CFO, you're expected to bring clarity to everything, including how your company manages ownership. The tools you use should make that easier, not harder. But when they come with hidden fees, data you can't always trust, and support you can't rely on, you end up with more frustration than clarity. That's where Pulley comes in. Pulley is the cap table management platform built for finance leaders who need accurate, decision-ready data from a system that works for your business, not against it. With Pulley, you get intuitive workflows, audit-ready reporting, and support you can count on, all backed by predictable pricing you can plan around, so you can stay compliant and make smarter decisions about your company's future. Manage everything from fundraise modeling to ASC 718 reporting to custom liquidity programs, all on one trusted platform. Hundreds of high-growth companies like Linear, Fathom, and Runway trust Pulley to help turn ownership into a strategic advantage. And joining them is now easier than ever. You can switch to Pulley in as little as 5 days. And for a limited time, they're offering 25% off your first year. To claim your exclusive offer, visit pulley.com/mostlymetrics. That is PULLEY.com/mostlymetrics. Pulley.com/mostlymetrics. Well, if you've listened to this podcast before, you definitely know that I think it's cool to be a fan of business. I'm obsessed with researching how the best companies operate and specifically how they manage their money. And I've learned that a company's financial stack can make the difference between world domination and obscurity. That's why I want to tell you about Brex, because I want you to rule the world. Brex is an impressive financial services and software company that has grown immensely since it was founded in 2017. In just the last year alone, Brex accelerated customer acquisition by 50%, with 91% growth in enterprise customers. And there's good reason that over 30,000 companies from startups to enterprises have flocked to Brex. Brex offers the world's smartest corporate card on a full stack global platform that is everything CFOs need to manage their finances on an elite level. Plus, they offer modern banking and treasury, as well as intuitive expenses and accounting automation, bill pay, and travel. Wow, it's all in the roster whenever you need it. Brex grows with you. CFOs tell me all the time that Brex makes it easy to control spend before it happens, automate annoying tasks, and optimize their finances. Because listen, at the end of the day, Brex helps them make every dollar count. So if you're a fan of smart businesses too, check out Brex at brex.com/metrics. That's brex.com/metrics. Michaela, welcome to the Run the Numbers podcast.
CJ, thanks so much for having me on.
It's always fun when I get to meet people in real life, like before they come on the pod. Like I would say 90% of the people I've had on, like I meet them afterwards, and it's always like this, you're taller than I thought. like Charlie Kevers from Carta, I met him. I'm like, well, dude, you're taller than I thought you were in person. People never say that about me, but it was so cool to hang out with you at A16Z's, what was it called? Road to CFO event?
Yeah, it was like a cultural CFO mentorship event. And it was so awesome to hang out. We were all the way up at the top at Manhattan. So great views. And what a fun dinner that was.
That was a blast. We got to hang out with Vanna, the CFO of Grindr, too. And
yes.
She's a riot.
That was so much fun. And I'm so glad that she eventually got the Cosmo that she ordered at least 3 different times. They kept coming back with wine. She's like, that is not the same thing.
I asked for the drink menu and I was like, can I get a beer? And they're like, well, what type of beer do you want? I'm like, can I just get a Miller Lite? And she turned to me, she's like, you're really ordering a Miller Lite like on the 60th floor up here?
They were going to escort you out at that point, but I put a word in for you, so they kept you in.
You can take the kid out of Boston, but you can't take the Boston out of the kid.
Can't take the Miller Lite away from him, though.
Yeah, I'm like, please. But yeah, that was fun. I want to dive into some hot topics we got on deck here. And you've had this really cool career where you've gotten to play with the different levers for growth at your disposal. And so I want to start by talking about company construction. And you had this hitter of a comment that companies are kind of a utility function, and you have these levers that need to be optimized. And that phrase, utility function, that piqued my interest. You got to break it down for me.
So first off, I'm a recovering, or maybe just continued existing econ major from undergrad. And so one of the things that really made sense to me, and I'll be honest, there were some concepts that were kind of beyond the pale, but the thing that really kind of made sense in my brain was this microeconomic concept, which really looks at the decisions made by units, so by companies, by households, by individuals, of a utility function, which is essentially saying that decisions are made. It's an art and a science how a decision is made. And the science part is that there are these variables that individuals, businesses, households are optimizing for. And then there's coefficients against those variables, which is the relative weighting on, what's more important in a given moment in time versus less important. And what you're trying to get to there optimally is, maximum utility, or like your most happiness, right? And for a company, the translation is the actual value of the company, valuation, whatever it is, like true company value. And specifically there, when I think about, what those variables are within a company and what those levers are, as you mentioned, it's kind of, it'll obviously depend on specifics of the company and the vertical, but broadly, we're talking about, growth, retention, margin, bottom line, or like profitability, cash runway, which is related to that, but is a little bit different. And we can talk about why I kind of put that in a separate bucket. And then that ultimately lands at the company value as you think about how you're balancing all of these different factors. So that's the art and the science of the decisions being made at a company.
And I think it's artful in a way too, because all of them are interconnected in some way, shape, or form. I've discussed this with a couple people on the podcast recently that like people think that the P&L is like just this static thing. It's like revenue, cost of goods sold, OpEx. You get the profit eventually, but it's like, no, they're actually interconnected. So like if you get more profit, you can plow it back into the machine to hopefully get more revenue. So it's like, I
Exactly.
don't know, time is a flat circle or something like that.
I think ideally, if you have and this is what investors are looking for, right? So this
Yeah.
kind of gets into the heart of it, right? Is if you're able to pump more into a business because they want to invest, for you to be able to put that money into your business and then be able to fuel your top line, which then creates that sort of positive momentum. And I think what we're talking about here is, first having a product market fit and then getting that GTM flywheel going and getting that escape velocity. So yes, absolutely agreed. It's interconnected. And in some ways, actually, they relate, but then they also kind of have tension with each other, which is why
Yeah.
it's so interesting talking about kind of how to optimize company value.
Do you have any examples? I know there's a lot going on in AI in the SaaS world right now.
Oh my gosh, there's so much going on. It is such an incredible moment to be in the CFO seat and watching what's happening with AI, because it's a total game changer in what's going on with businesses. And it's so cool to kind of take what we know traditionally to be true and then try to update that for this kind of step function moment. But one of the things that, I was thinking through as I was thinking about, how do you articulate this utility function, and how do you actually use it as a CFO to enable the qualitative articulation of what's going on in the business. And so one example I saw was at a company that I was speaking to, and they're a traditional SaaS startup.
Sure.
And as they're thinking about their plan for the next year, one of the things that they know to be true is that if they don't create some sort of an AI nucleus in their product, then they'll be kind of a generation behind in the tech. And so, as they think about kind of taking this back to utility function, is as they think about what variable they need to optimize for, next year, it's obviously in this R&D spend category, but that really relates to retention, right? That's the reason why, and keeping themselves in game, that's the reason why they need to kind of revamp the product and rethink that sort of AI nucleus. And so, as we think about all the different levers, like they're going to have to take a hit on, their bottom line, because they're going to need to invest into R&D, because they need to keep their customers with this, new gen product that they're going to beta out. And they need to be able to get new customers to think, oh, this isn't like last generation's tech. This is actually the new thing that we all care about. So it's kind of an interesting moment of kind of balancing those variables. And it's going to change every year or every few months, depending on what the real priority is for the business going forward.
And I like to joke that there's like no AI budget fairy. It's not like you just get this magical like
Extra
stack of
buckets
money. Yeah,
of
like, hey, you can use
dollars.
this for your
Yeah.
AI innovation now. Like,
Yeah.
no, like you have to take it from somewhere else.
Yeah. I mean, there's a finite amount of cash to go around the table. And you have to decide, this is where we need to funnel it right now. I think the reason why people might say that, by the way, and
Mhm.
are you saying this for startups, or are you talking about the buyers?
I'm saying it. Well, it applies to both because as a
Yeah.
buyer, it's not like I have just like a blank check now to go and buy
Yes.
stuff that like
Yes.
I didn't have in budget before. Like it's going to have to come from either headcount or supplant a different software. But I mean, inside the company too, like to fund that innovation, it,
Right.
I don't know, maybe there are boards out there that say like, you know what, that 20% we wanted in profit, like put that into AI. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I mean, listen, maybe they will, because they think that down the road it's going to pay off on multiples of that 20% profit. But I also think the reason why people may say that is because AI does, in investing, like in the VC world, it's unlocked a lot of, as we know, litanies of millions and billions of dollars are flowing into AI and AI innovation. And, I was actually listening to something before where they estimate that it might even be, trillions of dollars that are flowing into what's going on with LLMs, right? So that did loosen up that pile of cash. Within a company, there's
Mm.
also a lot of, and I'm talking about like an enterprise at scale, there's this ongoing question of what's your AI strategy? What's your AI strategy? What's your AI strategy? So they're willing to take, like, I want to say, like, loosen up those dollars and put that into your AI strategy. So they are taking, to your point, that hit on whatever else, bottom line, something. So it's not the AI fairy. It's just the dollars are flowing into AI, and it's creating some pretty interesting investment opportunities and also some interesting experiments within the enterprise.
I was joking with you at dinner, like the prior two companies I was at, one was backup and recovery, pretty technical. The next one was cybersecurity, extremely technical. Didn't really know what we sold, if being honest. And then the next one, we were marketplace for car parts. And I remember an investor they were meeting with, he's like, "What is your AI strategy?" I'm like, "Dude, what's your AI strategy? I'm slinging brake pads over here. I don't know."
They're going to be more fabulous brake pads.
Yeah,
there's certain things you don't, I mean, listen, people, we can talk about self-driving cars all we want, but there's certain things I personally don't know that I want AI touching. And one of those is brake pads.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. So if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that I am incredibly passionate about the FP&A space because that's the route I went to get to CFO. And I want to tell you about a tool that has exploded over the past few years. It's called Aleph. And I remember getting outbounded by them about 2.5 years ago, and I actually took the bait because they claimed to be able to do a demo with my live data, with me right there on the call. And so I had to see it to believe it. And it was the founder running demos back then. Shout out Albert, hope you're listening. And he connected my NetSuite and built my P&L using their Excel add-in in like 15 minutes. And I was really impressed. Since then, Aleph has gone on to raise money from some of the top VCs out there, and they've built an impressive roster of customers. Many of their customers have been on the podcast, like the CFO at Turo, 8 Sleep, and Zapier. They're all really big champions and supporters of Aleph like me. But it's not just an Excel add-in. Aleph also allows finance teams to work with their live cross-system data using Google Sheets and their web app. And that's cool because it gives teams the option to support a wide range of needs and workflows like budgeting, forecasting, and variance analysis. And speaking of variance analysis, they're doing some really cool things with AI-powered variance analysis. It basically allows you to figure out what's going on and why, and it takes the time that you'd usually spend from hours to minutes. It's really cool. So I highly recommend checking them out and taking them up on that demo or trial, just like I did back in the day. And you can learn more and get started at getaleph.com/run. That is getaleph.com, aleph.com/run. Tell them CJ sent you. All right, I got to get up on my soapbox for a sec here. Everybody's talking about AI-powered this and automated that. But here's the thing about revenue recognition. It's not just about moving data around. It's about getting it right, full stop. So RightRev is laser focused on one thing, RevRec that auditors actually trust. See, there's a difference between automating revenue processes and automating revenue recognition correctly. RightRev was actually built by the godfather of RevRec, who understands ASC 606 compliance, audit controls, data validation, and the flexibility needed for complex B2B contracts. We're not trying to be your billing system or your ERP. We're the revenue recognition engine that sits between your contracts and your financials, making sure every dollar is recognized correctly, on time, every time. Companies like Snowflake and Logic Monitor don't just need fast revenue reporting, they need revenue reporting that's audit ready from day one. And that's honestly where RightRev shines. And what I love about RightRev is they're not out there trying to be everything to everyone and just slap some, AI slop on top of it. While everyone is building these massive platforms that do everything in a kind of mediocre fashion, RightRev does one thing exceptionally well. They make sure your revenue recognition is bulletproof. Ready to stop gambling with your RevRec? Visit RightRev.com to see how we make complex revenue simple. That's RightRev.com, where revenue recognition actually works. This episode of Run the Numbers is brought to you by Navan, the all-in-one travel and expense solution. CFOs and finance leaders, let's be honest here. Your T&E process is broken. Manual reconciliations waste valuable time, policy violations drain money, and limited visibility creates unnecessary risk. Nobody likes that. Navan cuts through these problems, giving finance teams the clarity and control needed to close with confidence, faster and with fewer headaches. Connect your existing eligible Visa, MasterCard, or American Express cards directly to Navan and keep all your card rewards and banking relationships. Get real-time expense tracking, automated policy enforcement, and AI-powered reconciliation that works. Companies like Anthropic, Unilever, and Zoom trust Navan to manage travel spend smarter and increase compliance. Are you ready to modernize your T&E process? Visit navan.com/runthenumbers for your demo today. That's navan.com/runthenumbers. Tell them CJ sent you. They'll hook you up. Michaela, what are some of the less visible levers, but like still high impact that you've identified over time as like, hey, we should toggle this one?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the best levers are the ones where you, if you can find them, right? They're magical, but are the ones where you don't actually have to make strong trade offs. Because most of the time, you're talking about trade offs when you're talking about decisions being made in the company. So one of them, a really easy one actually is, but really impactful, is collections and
Mm,
cash. So if you can get upfront cash collections, let's say, if you're an enterprise and you have an annual contract, getting annual collections versus quarterly is an order of magnitude different when it comes to your actual free cash flow and your actual cash balance. And so even if it takes, a little bit longer on the negotiation front, it's so worth it for being able to fund your own business with your own customer collections. And so that's one where it's not a significant trade off to be able to get there. And you can even spiff your sales team on it, or there are different ways to do it. But that's a big one. I would model that out for sure. Say, what would my cash balance look at the end of the year if I actually get all my customers to pay upfront? And you might be surprised by what you see there.
Someone once told me that prepaying up front is like, oh, that's not just prepayment, that's customer funded development. And like I had this mindset shift that was like, oh, they're actually paying for us to make new stuff.
Yes. I mean, it's cash that you are getting without, investor expectations or without, having to pay interest in the form of
Well
debt. So
said.
it's a very strong form of building up your balance sheet. So I highly recommend looking at that toggle. Another one is, I do think that and I'm talking about at the beginning of when annual plans are being put together, and a lot of times you're going to get a huge amount of headcount requests, right, across all the different functions. I have seen in the past that you are able to get by with quite a bit less headcount than you think. Obviously, that I would be careful with that lever, because you don't want to burn out the team either, and you do want to meet the moment. And let's say you have a lot of product roadmap that needs to be shipped. You want to make sure you have enough hands on keyboards to be able to do that. But especially in this era of AI, I would really think about, how do you augment the FTEs. FTEs are such a expensive and sticky investment that you want to be very careful in adding headcount, and it's also your biggest expense, right, as an
Yeah.
organization. So that's another thing I would model out.
Michaela, do you think that you should still model to hire the people, but gate them like based on performance thresholds?
You mean in terms of meeting the interview standards? Is that what you mean?
So like when I always push people to take less headcount at the start of a year,
Mm,
but what I found works like the second best option is to say, listen, we're going to plan on these things, but we're going to release or unlock that headcount once we hit these milestones.
yeah,
So
that
it's
makes
kind of taking a middle ground between yes, here you're approved, hire all of them as fast as possible, and more like if we say if you're committing to do this, then yeah, of course you can hire that person.
Yeah. So the counter argument you get there
Hmm.
is that it takes a while for that person to ramp up and be useful. And they're really needed. So you'll see this a lot, for example, with FDEs, right?
Yeah.
You're going to need to implement all this new business that we're going to be getting. And for them to be useful, it takes 3 to 6 months to ramp up. So we really need to hire ahead of that revenue coming in. That's where you start to get into a little bit of a quagmire. And I don't have here is the answer that everybody should use, but it is that blend of art and science, right? So, yes, okay, let's plan on adding, you say we're going to add, 5 customers in that quarter. Let's staff up to add 2 or 3, right? And let's have a conversation if we start to see that things are really breaking. And also, how are we running the organization? Is there any other way other than throwing heads at it that we can get this work done? So
Mm.
engaging in that conversation, I think, is a helpful way to go about it as well.
And as orgs get bigger, you start to notice that you can fill some of the capability gaps by just shifting what people are working on. Like if you're at a company that's
Yeah,
publicly traded and you're
yeah,
hiring for a certain engineering profile, I can guarantee you there are probably 12 people in that company who actually fit that, unless it's like some AI unicorn that we actually need from the outside. But like
yeah.
most of the time I found there is somebody inside and they may not be uh just the hierarchy of where they're reporting to and the projects that they're on that aren't in alignment.
Yeah, so it's really looking at the talent that you have on the bus, right? And then reassembling them onto the seats that you actually need them in. Absolutely agreed. I think that there's a fair amount of that, but to get to a point where you're able to identify those people, have those conversations, try to figure things out, you really need to lean on the functional heads who understand those details a lot better than you do, and who are able to say, all right, I understand that there are constraints in my budget. I can't just hire everybody that I'd like to. Ideally, I would hire someone new into this role, but really, if pressed, maybe I can move this person into this role for a few months, and then, so that's again the push and pull of creating constraints around the budgets.
Any other hidden levers or maybe levers that get slept on?
Yeah, the other big one. So after you get through headcount, which is your biggest kind of P&L expense, then you start to talk about your cloud costs, and your cloud costs are so significant because one, it depends on the nature of your business, but a lot of times they can be quite high, and they also impact your gross margin, which is the most sensitive part of the P&L. And one of the things that I found to be really helpful there is to, again, engage your functional leaders who know more about what's going on with AWS, GCP, or Azure. How are they provisioning for the different instances that they're spinning up? Does it have to be this gigantic instance? Can it be smaller ones? So having those conversations to say, I would like to understand whether we can make improvements in margin, and explaining why that's important and seeing what they say. And the reason why that area of the P&L is so sensitive and why this conversation is so worth investing a lot of time in and having is because investors, again, want to put money into your business. You want to put money into your own business that will go into your business, not into AWS's pocket, right? We're not creating companies just to give money to AWS. We're doing it to be able to actually build organizations. So if there is a more efficient way to do that, then that is worth a conversation all day, any day.
The old adage, like 50% of venture dollars go to Google or Google AdWords. Like, I've always thought in the back of my head, like, couldn't you also say, like, well, 20 to 25% of venture dollars just go to AWS or GCP?
Yes. And let's be honest, most of the time it's AWS. And it's, again, as I've said this so many times in my own companies, is, we're running this organization because we want to invest into, the operating expense part of the P&L is an investment into the business, right? An investment into people is investment into headcount. I don't want to just be investing in AWS. It's not an investment. That's just money out the door, right? That's rent versus a mortgage payment.
Yeah.
So, and you want to fund your mortgage payment if possible.
That's an amazing segue into talking about growth and durable growth, to be more specific.
Yeah.
Why does how you grow matter just as much as how much you grow?
Yeah, so not all growth is created equal. And, we've talked about how investors want to think about your business. And that's really how your board, and honestly, you as an executive, want to also think your business this way, which is, I want to know that when I bring dollars in on the top line, that I'm able to then efficiently take those dollars, put them back into the business, put them into sales and marketing, R&D, whatever it is, into the infrastructure and G&A. And then I know that I'm going to get, more customers, more dollars on the top line. I'm going to create that positive, go-to-market flywheel. So there are ways to bring dollars into that top line that are not creating that flywheel. So, for example, not all ARR is created equal, right? We know that, right? Not all ARR is actually AR&R, so annual recurring and revenue. And so there's a reason why that kind of revenue standard is the gold standard of revenue, and it's because it will recur. You can underwrite it, you can expect it to still be there in a year, and you can grow it. And so looking at the details of what's actually in that top line will tell you how far you are in that journey, or how you're going on that journey of creating that go-to-market flywheel, right? Or creating that flywheel for your business. So just throwing dollars into the top line, that's not enough. Also, the margin on those dollars, right? If you're adding, an enormous amount of services dollars, that's FTE intensive, that's a lot less lucrative on a margin basis. That means less investment into the rest of your business. So, analyzing that top line, I think, is important, and not all growth is created equal.
You said that so well, because it's tantalizing to take on this empty calorie revenue that you can get through like certain partnerships or like APIs.
Yes.
And then you step back, you're like, we're making like no money on this after we pay everybody else who's involved.
Yeah, and it's if you're doing something like that, be very clear as an executive team and with your board on why. Maybe there is some qualitative reason why that empty calorie revenue is useful. Maybe it has to do with, beating out competition, which is really important to get that started, to get your name out there. Or maybe it has to do with partnership, right? And maybe that person will eventually acquire you. So there is a use case for it, but be very clear on why you're doing it and don't let that be your modus operandi.
And I've gone back and forth on professional services revenue, and I want to get your take
Mm,
on this because like half my brain is like, well, the customer's not going to stick around if you don't implement it, right? And it's
right.
probably somebody betting their career on like this ERP implementation going correctly. But at the same time, it is not margin accretive most of the time. If you're lucky, you break even. I don't know. How do you think about PS?
Yeah, so I think you need a certain amount of services to stay in front of the customer and stay. It's almost like the investment you're making to stay. So obviously, you have to implement them correctly. Start there. As much as you can productize that implementation, make that implementation in some way more cookie cutter than bespoke, and flow that through your R&D investment. That I think is a useful way to make sure that your customer's up and running correctly. But beyond that, it's a way to stay consultative and stay in front of the customer.
Oh, great
And it,
point. You can upsell them.
absolutely, that's what I was going to say. Net retention,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so you need to keep them, and you need to keep them, and you need to sell them more things. And so it's, as I think services is a necessary evil, but you have to be, or let's call it not evil, but let's call it a necessary investment,
Yeah.
because I mean, that's a very difficult role and I don't want to downplay it. It's a necessary investment. However, again, it needs to be balanced.
And for a reason, not because
And
your product stinks and you can't get it up and running.
it can be, depending on, the whether your business is kind of in the earlier stages or if you're a little bit more mature and sort of at scale or in that scale up stage. If you have a very large services organization, sometimes it can be viewed as being a tape and scissors approach to gaps in the product. So knowing that that could be the way it's interpreted, I think it's something to be very careful about in how you think about your services organization. Again, you need to have, it's almost like it gets to a point where of saturation where you need to get to a certain point, and it's absolutely necessary that you have an excellent services organization that is staying in front of the customer, keeping them, engaged, making sure that there's a good feedback loop to your R&D team on your product roadmap, et cetera. But at some point, it reaches a point of saturation where outside investors might look at it and be like, why is your services org so big?
Yeah.
And what's happening in your product?
Michaela, ARR, I think it's thrown around like the Wild West, especially on LinkedIn. You get somebody who's like doing like a basket weaving project, and you're like, this is a reoccurring basket I'm selling. I'm like, no, it's not. Uh, ARR, and I saw you wrote down ERR. What's that?
ER, experimental recurring revenue. So people are starting to throw that term around.
We must be so back if we're throwing that term around.
You know why? For AI, right? So, like we said before, companies have, or enterprises have their, what's your AI strategy? And so, the leaders will say, oh, we need to have an AI strategy. Let me try out a few different tools, figure out what my AI, tool set is going to look like, and let me sign this customer up for, or this product up for a certain amount of time. And they're kind of experimenting to figure out what their AI strategy is. And that goes beyond just testing them out for 90 days. Sometimes you will need to, have them around for about a year or so. So as we think about AI growth, one of the questions is the durability of that revenue, not just on an annual basis, but beyond this ERR spike where everybody's trying to figure out what their AI strategy is.
And I'm like thinking through my own businesses, like
Yeah.
credit card bills right now. Like, what is ERR? I've been playing around with Lovable a lot because I just think it's interesting. I want to be on the bleeding edge of things, and I'm trying to build like a benchmarking tool. But like,
Yeah.
probably from their perspective, they should think of me as ERR, not ARR. Like I don't have an engineering org to keep building something whenever that point is that I want to transition it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I wonder if there's any correlation, and this is me speculating entirely, between the ACV or the size of the contract, how much you're paying Lovable and ERR versus retention. Because the other side of it is they could view you, because I'm assuming you're not paying a ton for it unless you are, and that's the thing you enjoy doing. They could view you also as a potential lead, right? And so then that feeds into potential top of funnel activity. So I've seen companies also say, I know that I'm not going to be, this is not a recurring base of these kind of, I don't want to say individual users, but these like small users, but I use them as a lead to try to, feed my top of funnel for the larger contracts.
Let's stay on this example for a second here, because actually
Yeah.
I ran into the limit of like tokens or whatever. It was
Yeah.
$25 a month. And
Yeah.
then I had to upscale it to $50 a month. And I think like soon I may have to go to $100 a month. And by the way, I'm no engineer here. This is probably because I'm just prompting it wrong and I'm eating up all these credits. But Michaela, they may look at me and if they think it's ARR and be like, we can plan our operations around this. We've had net dollar retention of over 200%, 300% with this customer. Like it does make the equation more difficult.
I agree with that. But CJ, you seem to really like the product. Maybe you are.
Maybe I am. Maybe it is ARR.
And you know what? Maybe you are getting used to using it. So I, for example, just purchased. I have a few different script trainers, but one of the ones that is, really not my wheelhouse is Canva, and it's useful, right?
Yeah.
But I don't usually generate very many images, but my kids needed it, and I needed to make birthday cake images, and there's all sorts of.
I was gonna say birthday cards. We use it in my house for that.
Yes, exactly.
Or the invitations. Yeah.
There's all these use cases, and all of a sudden, our experiments, I'm not reliant on it. And I'm like, oh man. And then I also had to, they upsold me because I ran out of the tokens. So there's, and that's happening at the enterprise level too. So it's a really
Yeah.
interesting moment. And how do you test the durability of that revenue? That part I don't know. You have to, get customer feedback and use cases. But it's a very interesting thing to look at.
And I want to tie it back to why the margin component matters too, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of these products too, they take a lot to keep running. Like I know they're
Mhm.
charging me $25 or $100 a month now, but like I'm probably racking up some serious compute bills compared to what I'm paying. In
Yeah.
your career, how have you looked at margin and the different bets that your company has to make?
Like I said before, margin hits is the most sensitive area of the P&L. We talked about investing back into the business, but it also hits all of your efficiency metrics. So as you think about like CAC payback, for example, right? And you want to understand the efficiency of your go-to-market motion as you're investing in acquiring customers, how quickly are you paying back that investment that you're making in the form of their revenue, and also after implementation and with the ongoing services, like how long does it actually take for you to recoup that investment, to be able to kind of invest it into other things? And that is margin weighted because you have to look at that ongoing cost of servicing the customer and obviously provisioning for them. So it's amazing what you can do for the efficiency of your business with slight changes in margin, like a 1 point change in margin, a 2 point change.
It's a
in margin.
nonlinear impact on the rest of the P&L.
Completely. And it hits everything.
Yeah.
It hits everything. It hits your EBITDA. It hits what's going on with cash burn, obviously. It hits, CAC payback. It hits your magic number. I mean, we're talking about everything, which is why I keep saying it's such an important area of the P&L to focus on.
And what makes it more difficult, at least it has been difficult in my career in bridging the gap, is the people who impact gross margin the most are the engineering team.
Yes.
And I'm not saying engineering teams aren't financially savvy or anything, but like they're the furthest removed from like the Excel spreadsheets, especially in the language that I use to talk to them. So I don't know.
Yes.
What's been your experience?
So let's start with step one. So step one is, as a CFO, you're coming in, and one of the things that is the most helpful to start with is to try to create a common language at the executive level. And that is a language that is also, by the way, used by your board, right? So board, CFO, CEO, and you and everyone else should be speaking in terms that everyone knows are important. And that has to do with, these metrics that we're talking about, right? Like gross margin. Let's start with gross margin, right? Because this is the one we're talking about. Once you get that language and explain why it's important. And by the way, those conversations should always be two-way, right? It's not a one-way. I am coming in and I am explaining at you, kind of go back and forth to understand. You should also try to understand what's going on at the business, right? So you need to be really hearing what the other leaders are going to say. But you're sitting down with your, head of engineering or R&D or CTO, whoever it is who's running those organizations, and you're saying this is why margin is important. Here's what it does for our business. Here's what it does for the company value over time. And at the same time, your team is doing the same with their counterparts in the various organizations so from FP&A to all the various engineers. And that doesn't mean you go out there day one and you start explaining things or having these deep conversations. Like, have human connections with engineers. They're humans too. Finance people are humans too. Many people think we're not. We all
I'm a
are.
cyborg created in the lab.
Listen, I think that you'd be less expensive on a food basis if you were a cyborg. So have human connections, have human conversations, over time explain why this is important, and then you'll be surprised at how quickly, as long as everybody understands the why, you'll be surprised at how quickly decisions start to hinge on this language that you've created together. And so for engineers specifically, like we mentioned this before, the nuance of how you provision for the instances you're spinning up. Can you reserve them? Is there an EDP program you should be a part of? They'll know those things better than you will. You will know the numerical impact. So you really have to partner and have that conversation. And engineers are smart people. They'll understand why it matters and they'll go for it.
I also feel that it allows them to feel like they have skin in the game and that they're truly impacting something. And I will actually tell them the dollar amounts that either the product they're working on is bringing to the company or the cost of the cloud instances that we're running. Because I think it makes it feel like, wow, I have a lot of responsibility here.
People really respond well to numbers that make sense to them. So they'll know there are certain things that are qualitatively true. I think people get very excited when they see the quantitative reflection of that reality. So they're like, oh, I know I'm working on this thing and I can see that a lot of customers seem to really like it. And if you come in with numbers on top of that, I think people like that because it's something they can attach to that's objective.
Yes.
Right. And so as long as you're able to keep leaning back on that objective thing, which is numbers, I think it's a superpower in communication with the other kind of functional leads.
Well, communicating with engineers is one thing. Communicating with investors is another. And in
Yes,
their vernacular, they love to bring up net dollar retention. Can
they
you
do.
break it down for me why investors care so much about that metric?
Yeah. So, to start, there's a few different pieces here. One, new logo sales are really, really expensive, right? There's a reason why we look at metrics like CAC payback, because, if we think about all the engagements that you need as you have prospects, if you think about, comping your salespeople and you think about all the steak dinners and seafood towers and flying all over bananas, who knows where, these are expensive things to do. And if you're going to bring that new customer on, investors are willing to underwrite that investment if they know that that customer is going to stay with you and it is going to grow with you. And so when you think about net dollar retention, that speaks to exactly that motion. And so as we think about a company that's growing, let's say the net retention is 120%. If there were no more new logo sales in the next year, hopefully at a minimum, you have 20% growth in the business. And that's an excellent baseline. The other thing that it points to is sort of softly is obviously the product market fit of your product, which is really important to make sure that, that's working. And then obviously that's do or die. And then there is the NPS, right? Are you creating something that customers like, that they want to buy more of? It can also point to one thing that came to mind just now, making sure that your pricing strategy is such that it allows for an organic upsell motion, right? So maybe it's not an existential problem, maybe it's a pricing problem, but it broadly speaking, investors are looking at it because they're trying to understand how good is your product market fit, how happy are your customers, how much are they sticking with you?
Yeah, I think gross account retention is a great marker of PMF in the early days. And then in the later days, net dollar retention has always been the gold standard that I look at for like, are you
Yeah.
keeping up here?
The only thing that I would look at there, CJ, is I agree with you, but you want to also make sure that your net retention or your upsells are not masking a churn problem.
Ooh,
And you see that a lot of times as well. And if you do have a churn problem, there's always going to be a question on why. And why isn't your curve more normally distributed? Like, why are there some that are upselling a ton and some customers that are churning a ton? And maybe there's a reason for it and you need to adjust your ICP. But that's the one piece that I would look under the hood there for.
it brings up a good point. Do you think it's actually possible to over service your customer?
I, 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 you're asking a CFO. Of course, I think that you can overservice your customer.
So how does that show up and what does it mean?
That means that your services organization is way too big, is ultimately what I think it means. I think that others around the table who are non-CFOs would say, definitely not, and as long as they're upselling, if they're upselling a huge amount, what does that even mean? I do think, though, that again, as we think about the balancing act of running a business, being careful about how much is put into the services organization is something that is very important and very hard to dial back later on. Like if your customers have always had this incredible white glove service, which a lot of enterprise SaaS companies want to do, over time you can't then say like, actually we're going to move to self-serve. Bye. And you can. It's painful, very, very painful. So I'd be very methodical about it in the early days.
Sales reps, a lot of times it's like to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Like they will try to
Yes.
sell them everything they can possibly off the back of the truck. And
Yes.
that can show up as that empty calorie revenue if they're going to churn, because you're still paying the sales rep, right? You're still paying for sales and marketing costs, and that'll impact your LTV over time.
Absolutely. And you need to make sure, so the sales rep will sell whatever to whoever wants to buy. And I don't want to again cast aspersions on sales reps. Again, it's a rough job.
It's the hardest job, I think.
It's very hard, right? And there's a reason why we compensate them as well as we do. And I've always told my reps that my favorite checks to write are commission checks, because that means that we're doing good things, and getting customers across the line. The only thing I would look at there is this should be really funneled earlier in your kind of go-to-market funnel, is making sure that the customer's in your ICP, making sure that the use case makes sense and it's something that your services organization can be successful in implementing, and that at the end of the day, it's not just the sales rep throwing a customer over at the customer success team and saying, it's up to you to make them successful. I got them to sign on the dotted line.
Totally. I want to transition to talk about budgeting a bit, because me and you both have dealt with leaders who just say like, give me my budget and I'll manage to it. Don't worry about it. What's your take on that? Should you give them autonomy, or is that like disconnecting the finance team from the reality of the business?
Yeah, I think I've heard that so many different times. I would start, as I mentioned before, I would start with making sure that there's this common vernacular at the leadership level. So step one, and making sure that there's this, we're all in the same canoe, we're all rowing in the same direction. If you're not killing it, I'm not killing it, right? We need to kind of do this whole thing together. And as we know, when we put together budgets for the year, they're wrong almost as soon as they get approved by the board, because there's so much that is changing in the underlying business. And so taking a budget that just got approved by board, lopping it over and saying, see you later, just manage to it, that's not the best way to be running the finances of your company. So what I do in that instance would be making sure that there's a conversation had around not the ultimate cost, like you have $500,000 for the next 3 months, just go spend it. It's what are the metrics that I'm going to be looking at the end of each month to make sure that we're in alignment with where we expect it to be in terms of the company trajectory, and having those ongoing conversations with each of the functional leaders. I do think it's important to have the humility as a CFO to know that you don't know the functional leader's area of expertise better than they do, for the most part, right? If you have great functional leaders, an example of that is I am a finance person. I'm not a marketer, and there are reasons for that. And so my CMO is going to know better than I am how to market the product. So you have to start with that trust of that person knows better, but then just create the partnership of, okay, you definitely understand better what engagements and activations we need to invest in. I'm going to come back though and say, here's the CAC payback and here's what it's looking like. And we're going to have to figure this out together.
And to your point, I mean, all budgets are wrong. It's just like a matter of how wrong this is going to be.
Yeah, yeah. As
How,
soon as they're
as soon as you
approved.
hit print, like it's going to be off by some amount.
Of course it is. Yeah.
How have you adjusted the way that you broker the budget with execs in real time as your career has progressed?
Yeah. So obviously at the beginning of this whole journey, it was a matter of, well, here's the budget. And times were also a lot easier. We're talking back to like 2013, 2014. Here's the budget and, go spend, right? And we'll check back in. I mean, we did do monthly check-ins on budget, but the budgets didn't really change very much until the next board meeting. And then the board would say, what's going on? Things aren't looking the way we thought they would. And then you sort of redo the budgets for the remainder of the year, which I think is a little bit too late, right?
Yeah.
Because then the quarter's already rolled in, the people have already been hired, the expense is already out there. And so what that's evolved to over time has been continuing those sort of monthly check-ins, but also, again, making sure that your FP&A team is out there understanding, kind of like almost like a CX role, kind of understanding what's going on at the bottom line of the business, like on the ground in the business, and then coming back and saying, actually, you know what, things are starting to look a little bit different. We might want to make some adjustments here and there, and then having those communications with the various functional leads to say, I actually think that we need to adjust the budget, and here's the reasons why. And again, maintaining those conversations. There's also a lot more religion now around efficiency. So having those conversations became a lot easier than it used to be in like 2021, whereas like, who cares? We just have to grow. We just have to spend and get more people and we have to grow. And now it's a little bit more of a measured approach.
I love that. I've also never heard of FP&A as the CX function. I'm going to steal that.
You absolutely, please do. I think it's important for FP&A to be out there the same way that CX feeds into the product roadmap and kind of has that empathy for the customer journey and whatever the customer is going through. FP&A should have that empathy for the other functions and what they're going through, and make adjustments to our own forecast as needed based on that.
Many CFOs are like the story of the shoe cobbler whose kids have no shoes, where they totally forget to budget for their own department or to even fill the roles if they do budget for them because they want to save money. How have you managed to look out for yourself and your own team over time while also dealing with everybody else's problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think and you absolutely have to care about your team, because let's be really honest here. Within the sort of org chart of a company, the finance team, we're not the cool kids in the room, right? No one's sitting there. All the engineers aren't sitting there thinking about FP&A, but FP&A is obviously thinking about the engineers. So you do have to kind of look out for your team and make sure that there's some understanding around what what are they actually bringing to the organization. And I think that again hinges back to communicating across the executive team and saying, here are things that matter in the business. Here are the analyses that FP&A is running. Accounting's going through their audit, and there's all these crazy tax filings, and these are things that are have to get done for us to continue to grow as an organization. Here's what RevOps is doing. Legal is doing their best, but they're understaffed. So I think it's modeling out first. It's having those human conversations. And then it's also modeling out the behavior that you want the other executives to have, right? You don't want one of the CMO to come in and say, I need 18 marketers tomorrow. You're obviously not going to be doing the same thing, right? So you're going to come in and say, we're going to be adding X amount of people. Here's the reasons why in this coming year. And then having that communication with your team as well. So there's also this, so it's explaining things at the top level to the executives and to the board. Then there's also kind of explaining it down to your team at the level that they're ready to hear it and say, hey, here's what's going on at the company. Here's where we're growing. I understand that this particular 2-month stretch is a bit rough. I do expect it to look a little different after these 2 months. We're going to try to stretch through it. I'm going to help you with it, but we're not going to add a headcount because we have this 2-month sprint, right? So there's a little bit of that push and pull and kind of being on both sides of the fence. And a lot of times I think as long as your team understands that one, you are advocating for them, but two, you have to be a steward of the business and they are responsible as well. And they're themselves going out and speaking with all the folks in the company. So they know what's going on. So you're generally having reasonable conversations as long as they understand the why and the logic behind it and can debate with you on it. Listen, sometimes you're going to miss things. Hear people when they tell you, no way, you're driving me crazy. I can't do this again. I need some help on the team. And then you have those conversations. But hopefully you're having conversations well before it gets to that point.
Yeah, I've tried to have those conversations a lot. And then I also realized that like my team is soldiering on where I'm going to them saying, you can hire someone. And they're like, no, I'm fine. I'm like, I can tell you're burnt out. And they're doing the same thing as me. Like, we don't need an additional headcount.
Yeah, sometimes you have to force that as well because when you get burnt out, you make mistakes.
Yes.
And then you start to create this whole negative flywheel effect for yourself, right? Like if you're running an analysis for the CX organization, you're sending it and it's wrong, then they're going to start being like, well, why is that? And then they start to question you. So it's not that you can't do it correctly. It's just like, you're exhausted. It was the 18th thing you did that day and you like can't spend the time on it. So again, it's also educating and I wouldn't say coaching, not educating. It's coaching the team on that as well.
One of the best sayings you had when we were hanging out at that New York dinner is there were a bunch of us who were parents with relatively young kids. Yeah. And you said, it was one of those days, blah, 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 where you're feeling very unslept. I was making decisions and I was very unslept at the time. I was like, that hit on a visceral level.
I think that any parent with young kids deeply understands. And also if you're a startup operator and you're a parent, I mean, you're stretched so thin. And, even if you're not a parent, right? And you've just been running through whatever you're going through, kind of call it an M&A process, call it, fundraising, call it budgeting, and you just haven't slept in 2 weeks, then you are deeply unslept and you're going to make mistakes, right? And that makes it not a good look, even though it's understandable. We're all human, but let's call a spade, right? You don't want to send out wrong spreadsheets.
Yeah. I can sense that you operate from a perspective of assuming everyone is a good actor and a team player until they're not. Like in this hour, we've talked a lot about metrics, but you've always brought the people back into it, which I think is incredible. What's usually the first sign though, Michaela, when there is like an erosion of trust? Because that's essentially what all these budgets are built upon.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a company, right, is built upon humans as of right now. Until we have end-to-end LLMs, it's going to be built on humans. Yeah, exactly. So first of all, yes, I do assume best intent. And I do assume, and I think a lot of CFOs should come into companies assuming that the people around the table are intelligent people. And that is why you are joining that organization. And they know more about their functional area than you do. So you start from that place, but where you start to see, because, sometimes you do have folks that are maybe not the best actors. When you start to have conversations where either there's not a sense of accountability that starts in like, you get this, like, this is the number that we're going to hit. Here's how we're going to hit it. Or the conversations kind of start to lose common sense. Like they don't actually make sense. And that's, again, this is all on a human level, right? This is qualitative. And you start hearing things like from a sales leader, like, I know we have to hit that number and I've had to hit that number. We didn't hit it. Here's all these exogenous reasons why, and starting pointing fingers around. A lot of times they'll throw marketing under the bus, and I'm giving just a
it happens a lot
here. Yeah. And sometimes that can be true. Usually though, and this is where that sort of, we're all in the same canoe going together kind of a thing, the number has to be hit. The sales team is the team that carries that number, the bag for that number. If something isn't working somewhere else in the organization, figure out a way to make it work. Because if if sales isn't hitting the number, then there's no way that, the marketing team is doing great. Like, marketing's not killing it if sales isn't killing it. Sales
Yeah.
can't point that finger at marketing because they should have been talking to them the whole time. Something here isn't working. So that's one of the examples that I would give.
Michaela, I like how you mentioned earlier that like truth in any org has a funny way of just leaking itself out and making itself known.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like it always sees the day of light. And finance people, I think a lot of us get into this because we're concerned with like a concept of like accuracy, fairness, and even justice, I think to an extent.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that and how our roles intersect with it?
Yeah, for sure. So, our role at the company is to piece together numerical truth with a
Mm,
capital T. That's our superpower, is that we live in fields of numbers, and thankfully numbers are objective. One of the things that's, take it to the next step, is that the numbers are, as long as they're correctly calculated, they're always right. The art is articulating the why, and you start to, work with the other executives around the table to articulate that why. Boards can also help with figuring out benchmarks, and then you can kind of lean on that also as another source of truth, because it's not just truth within your own organization, it's what's going on in the broader market, right? And how do I run my business in a way that is, the numbers kind of help me to make sense of what's going on right now. Benchmarks are helping me to make sense of where I need to kind of continue to invest going forward. And then, our role is to continue to develop that bench of gathering, synthesizing, and seeking out data that will continue to inform what that sort of quantitative truth looks like. So when you start to see behavior or investments, or sort of decisions being made that really kind of stray from what you're generally seeing as being kind of middle of the road, that's when you kind of go back to your numbers and to the benchmarks that you sort of looked at before.
that's awesome. Michaela, I'm going to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So I ask every successful person on the podcast, what's something you've messed up before?
I have a funny story there. So there was one time we were in the middle of COVID. It was like COVID era multitasking. I'm certain that my children were having some sort of meltdown in some other room that I could hear, and we were going through a fundraise. And I had a new FP&A hire who is totally fabulous, and she and I were on the phone. We were going back and forth on what we needed to do next for the due diligence requests that we were getting, and there was 8 different kind of pieces that we were trying to cobble together. And at the same time, I think I was WhatsApping my husband, asking him to like do something, like get the kids, please. Like, can you tell our daughter to stop screaming? And I was hanging up the phone because I was a little Zoom fatigued. And I literally, to my direct report, who was relatively new at the time, I was like, okay, all right, thank you so much. I'll talk to you later. Love you. I don't love her.
Love you, bye.
I'm telling you, CJ, I wanted to walk into the ocean after that. I was
Ugh,
so embarrassed. I mean, thankfully, it's one of those things that you can clear pretty quickly, but that was embarrassing.
that's hilarious. It's kind of like when you get out of an Uber at the airport, they're like, have a good flight. You're like, you too.
I almost feel like those batteries are like, oh, whatever. Here, I'm telling a direct report
Yeah,
that I love her. She's great.
that's a hard one to walk back. All right, next one I got for you. If you could tell your younger self something knowing what you know today, what would you tell her?
Yeah, I'd probably say that you can't outwork a toxic environment. I know that word gets overused a bit. So concretely, what I mean by toxic is an environment where there isn't communication and a common desire across the table to succeed. Sometimes there are situations where really the only correct way to react is to use your feet and leave.
Mm,
And that's not giving up. That's just reacting correctly to the environment. Those fights are so draining in a uniquely pernicious way. So that would be the advice that I would have given my younger self.
I like it. It's not quitting. It's up leveling to a better situation.
Exactly.
What are your favorite finance tools on the market today if you're building a stack from scratch?
I actually just got introduced to a company. I mean, everyone's talking about, agentic solutions and AI and the CFO AI stack. And it's such an exciting moment to be out there trying to understand this new world order. I was actually just introduced to a super cool new company called Concourse.co. which is an agentic layer on top of your financial data sources. And it kind of helps as like a mini FP&A analyst, like, through natural language, you can ask it. And by the way, this is not an advertisement for Conquerors. I just think they're super cool. You can ask it like, hey, can you run an analysis on my revenue last year? And here's all the details that I want from it. And it's able to spit that back at you and give you visibility into why, what the steps were that it took to get there, which I thought was super cool.
Yeah. I'm hoping all these FP&A tools and analysis tools get past like the initial stage of like, OpEx was up because you spent more.
It's my gosh.
Give me the
No,
media.
that was last gen.
Yeah.
And I remember those, and they were so frustrating because I was like, I know that my spend is up because I spent more. That's pretty obvious, but it's, getting to that next level of, can you concatenate, isn't that an Excel function?
Yeah.
Concatenate all these numbers and tell me some analysis, some output from it.
Love it. Last one I got for you. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen somebody try to expense?
So there were two things. It was the same person. The first one...
It's the same person?
It's the same person. The first one I was told was a mistake. The second one, I don't even know what the thought process was there. But the first one was a family vacation. And
do you know where it was to?
I think it was like the Bahamas or something fabulous and warm. And it were the plane tickets for the whole family. And the person said, oh no, I had the wrong credit card. So
Classic.
Sorry. Yeah, exactly. But then that person went and bought a bracelet, and it was supposedly for a customer. And we have a marketing gifting program. There's also a certain amount that you can give to customers and it not be bribery. We all know that. And so we had to go back and say, no jewelry to our customers.
No love gifts to our I can't believe you had to put that like in a policy. Like no Cartier bracelets for the customers.
No Cartier bracelets, no Tiffany bracelets, right? We're not doing that. But I appreciated my accounting team being very on top of it.
Love it. Michaela, this has been a blast. Thanks for carving out time for us.
CJ, this was so much fun. Thank you so much.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.